that we are not being pitted against each other, but we're lifting each other up. And that's really the framework for this conversation. And Tim, I know that these are a lot of these are heavy issues, and I don't expect you, I don't think anybody in this panel or the organizations who are co-sponsors, no one expects you to know all the answers. What we're most interested in is how do we forge a solution that is holistic, that is comprehensive, and that's systematic. And I think a lot of people would argue, like, Paku, that's so naive, you know, that it's impossible to help farmers and food insecure families, or to make clean water as well as, you know, support farm-to-school programs. But we really believe that that's really the only way. And so my first question to you is really about immigrant farmers. So as you know, I'm one of the co-founders of the Hmong American Farmers Association, and we are a nonprofit that works with Hmong farmers, many of whom are refugees, to build intergenerational and community wealth. Minnesota has a proud tradition of welcoming refugees and immigrants to this great state. And refugees and immigrants, in turn, have contributed much to our culture and our economy, whether as line workers at the Jennie-O plant in St. Cloud, or as teachers at Wellstone Elementary in St. Paul. Our own Hmong farmers make up more than 50% of all the farmers in the metropolitan area farmers market. And they work hard to grow fresh produce for our local schools, co-ops, restaurants, and family dinner tables. So my question to you is, if elected, what will you do to assist immigrant and refugee farmers in Minnesota?
Well, again, thank you all for being here. And all of you know, and these last couple of days have been challenging again in our political environment. And I think it's important to keep in mind, my daughter Hope is with me here today. The situation with these packages being mailed, these are being mailed to families where my daughter knows and stays with these people. I babysit their children. The dialogue that's gone into this. And of course, before that, it was about immigrants. And it's about mothers fleeing persecution, violence, political unrest to try and find a better place for their children. But that turned into an immigrant caravan overwhelming the country. I think this gubernatorial campaign has been pretty good, but I think I need to call it out where it is. Putting up a sign warning people to come into Minneapolis because of immigrants is not a pretty good campaign. Continuing to say you're not going to welcome immigrants into Minnesota is not really a pretty good campaign. That kind of gets to the heart of who we are. I think it's important for us to continue to say that and echo those thoughts. Minnesota is stronger because of immigration. Minnesota is better culturally because of immigration. But I think we have to take it a step further. Minnesota is immigrants, with the exception of possibly my running mate, Peggy Flanagan, who's Ojibwe. So the rest of us are all part of that tradition. And for us to understand in that intersection with farming and with agriculture, most of our families in the wealth, at least in my case where it came from, is my mom is still on the farm that's been in our family 131 years. That wealth that came off that land and the capacity to own that has nurtured generations. It allowed capacity for her to send her children to college by using that. She rents it out now, and in her retirement years, she has the capacity to stay at home. And I think something that I've seen in Congress, and we know the struggle between this, of producing enough food to feed the world, between traditional row cropping or large agriculture versus organic and closer to home, trying to strike that proper balance. But we also know there's plenty of room, and the movement towards, and this is encouraging to me, the movement towards sustainable agriculture is one that is now extending through all generations. It's one that we know it not only makes sense in terms of soil preservation, it makes sense in terms of economics, that there's markets out there for folks to be able to make a living doing this. And so it's important that our policies incentivize that. In Congress, we did beginning farmer and rancher legislation. We need to make sure there are set-asides for access to capital, to land, so people can get on them. We need to make sure that we're opening up markets, and I'm sure we're going to have this conversation about access to local markets, a farm to schools, those types of initiatives. But making sure that we're very deliberate in that agriculture as a noble profession, a needed profession, one that can be practiced in all corners of Minnesota, whether it's urban agriculture or whether it's CSAs or whether it's owning your own farm for canning purposes or whatever it may be in southern Minnesota. We have to have the policies in place that first and foremost break down those barriers to land acquisition and those markets that can be created outside of the traditional marketing techniques of the large-scale farms. So we certainly understand. I certainly think we need to incentivize. I certainly know, and I think we're going to get into this case too, in southern Minnesota, which quite possibly is the most productive agricultural land on the entire planet, we have food deserts in our communities. And the absurdity of that isn't lost on any of you here. The solutions, while a little bit complicated, and I think we'll come back to this theme, lie in the communities already there. Partnering together with what you already know to do best. In many cases, I see the job as the governor and the state to help align resources and partner, not to guide, and certainly to make sure that we're not putting up barriers by regulation that makes it so you can't market or you can't sell.
Great, thank you.
Well, hi, Congressman Maltz. My name is Ka Yang. I'm HAPA's research associate. I work fairly close with all of our Hmong farmers on our farm. My question today is about small farmers itself. Minnesota is a diverse state when it comes to agriculture. While we're the 4th largest producer of corn and the 3rd largest producer of soybean, we are also home to one of the country's most vibrant farmers markets, which are fueled by amazing small farmers. These small farmers are often younger and more ethnically diverse than the typical Minnesotan farmers. These farmers are the future of the farming of America, but they face many challenges, and several of those challenges is lack of access to land, lack of access to markets, capital and credit, technical assistance, trainings, and often they feel invisible in the conversation about farming. So take, for example, the recent tariffs on steel, which has led approximately to a 20% price increase in high tunnels. Part of what I do is manage the high tunnels for demonstration for our farmers, our Hmong farmers. And what they've seen is that they've seen the benefits of season extension and with these high tunnels. And so at HAPA, we've actually had 3 farmers who've become interested in purchasing high tunnels. But it's really difficult for them just because they're difficulty to, land, loans, and everything. But these 3 farmers were qualified for our EQIP program for purchasing high tunnels, but with these price increases and steel tariffs, they still couldn't afford them. So luckily, we were able to work closely with the vendors, and we were able to agree on a price, and they were able to work with us. But that's still really just a special case. So now we're only a small part of it. Many small farmers are now priced out of buying the much needed equipment. So if you become governor, what policies will you advocate for and support to help small farmers stay in business and make a dignified living? Thank you.
Again, a lot of agriculture policy. There's folks in this room know this very, very well, that the most important piece of legislation, conservation-wise and agriculture-wise, is the Farm Bill, and nutrition-wise, the programs that involve in it. I think all of you in this room know is that the Farm Bill has expired, and many of its conservation programs expired at the 1st of October. And let's be absolutely clear in here why it expired. It expired because the House of Representatives took draconian cuts to many of the programs that you're talking about. They took draconian cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Program. They took draconian cuts to some of the programs like CSP that we know make a difference on working lands conservation. So what I knew is that we're going to be underpinned by the federal farm policy, but the state of Minnesota can do things. The lesson I've learned, and it was working with Farmers Union Land Stewardship Project, go back to the beginning farmer and rancher legislation. It's one of the most, I'm proud of that accomplishment. I'm proud for all of us because we wrote it together, that did set-asides in terms of making sure that the farm programs were able to be flexible enough to be used by specifically beginning farmer and ranchers, but set-asides for minority and women-owned farms to make sure that they were there. I think in the state of Minnesota, and then there were, again, very smart things that this organization helped make happen, LSP helped make happen, was beginning farmer education pieces on that, Farm Beginnings, where you start showing people how to do this, you start giving them access to this, these type of things. And I'll go back to this. The only thing I have to say about the tariffs is that nothing that comes out of the administration now surprises me. It's ridiculous, it's terrible. But with that being said, we don't have the time nor the patience, and the folks you're talking about, to sit around and wait for them to do something about it. We in Minnesota have to do something. We're talking about, and this can apply, and I think it's what we're looking for from high tech to new businesses. Minnesota allowed the Angel Tax Credit to expire, that allowed for small businesses to get in and to start, and this is exactly what we're talking about. Peggy Flanagan and I have pledged to restate that. It was a $25 million process in there, the funding for it. we said that we're gonna do something different this time, that half of it goes to minority and women-owned businesses of it, so that we're targeting specifically the ones, because once again, the access to capital, the access to the markets are the things that are holding people back. And I think if we incentivize those, and that my job would be, should I be given the privilege to do this,